Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 384. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're honored to have with us the nationally celebrated author of The Human Trial, Audrey Gale. Audrey.
Thank you. What a nice introduction. Very nice, very nice. Well, I'm happy to be here with the Storycomic. And
Yes.
I read up on you a little bit myself, and I liked the way you talked about art and story and combining us all. And I couldn't agree with you more. I write because I love good stories and compelling stories. To me, a good story is not only something that grabs me and that I relate to the characters in some way, not necessarily like or approve, but fascinated, interested, and that they grab me, and then I have to know what's going to happen. And that carries me, that building suspense, that carries me through to the end. But the other aspect I really like about story, and you may or may not agree with this, is I also love to be learning something, being exposed to new knowledge and be learning something in a way that I don't even realize I'm learning. And so I tried to do that, both of those things, in The Human Trial, which is the first book in a trilogy, a
Wow. Okay.
medical thriller trilogy.
Okay. Well, because I noticed, in your bio, you mentioned it's like historical settings and scientific research is a couple things that actually just really spark your creativity. What is it about the historical setting and what is it about scientific research that you feel that draws you into utilizing those two aspects to put protagonists into a situation?
The simplest answer is I love historical fiction because, again, then you are learning through good storytelling and through characters that you find fascinating in some way. I don't think you always have to like them, but I think you have to have some reaction to them. Anyway, you're learning about a different time and place, and that's really the magic of books in general. You can live as a Roman general. You can live in the future of colonization of Mars. You can live. Someone asked me, why do we read? And my answer was immediate and simple, because one life is not enough. We
Mm.
get to live many, 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 many lives depending on how you read, how much you read. But you can be anywhere, anytime, any sex, any persuasion. You can be, for that period of reading, you can be everywhere in the universe and anywhere. So that's historical fiction. And then this story of the human trial really came to me by the universe slapping me several times. Um, I had three profound medically related experiences that finally, it's like, finally, I understood I was getting a message from somewhere in the universe to pay attention. Pay attention. The first was I was very, very ill in my mid 30s with a serious lymphatic infection throughout my body. You could see my lymph glands. They were swollen and painful and all terrible, ugly. And I went to my doctor, and he sent me to every specialist. At that time, I lived in San Francisco. Every specialist he could think of in San Francisco area, and nothing worked. Steroids,
Mm.
drugs of all kinds, blah, blah, blah. And and so a guy that worked with me said, I think you should come to my acupuncturist. And I went to the acupuncturist who, there were two Dr. O's. Dr. O number one was the acupuncturist, and Dr. O number two was the herbalist.
Mm.
And I had an acupuncture treatment. She said, you just have infection everywhere in your body. It's like, who cares what you call this? And then her brother gave me these nasty herbs and told me not to eat anything but vegetable smoothie with as much garlic and onion as I could tolerate, and this nasty powder that he gave me. And literally, it was a miracle. Given that I'd been to doctor after doctor after doctor, pretty much decided
Mm.
I was dying of lymphoma, it was overnight that my swelling was noticeably down, and within days I was back to normal. And that was through acupuncture and herbs. So that was the
Wow.
first thing. Then I won't go through all of these steps, but the final step was when my father was diagnosed with leukemia. And he came to my house. It must have been somewhere near UCLA that he was receiving a treatment, because he came to my house. I lived not far from there. And he said, "I don't care, Audrey. I do not care. I would rather die than do that again." And so I had had a wonderful experience. It was the actual experience that turned me on to these scientists that I researched. Um, it was my vet that saved my dog's life, and he used vibration, he used sound, he used chiropractic and acupuncture. He used a whole bunch of different methods. And he gave my 16-year-old, very sick golden retriever 3 more years of life, healthy, happy life. So I said to my dad, "Okay, I know you haven't asked me what I think you should do, but if you asked me what I think you should do, I would take you to my vet." And my dad, being my dad, so open minded, he said, "Okay, what have I got to lose?" And
Right.
at my vet made him a cassette tape. Back in the day, the cassette tape, and it was just sounds. And the vet explained to us that he didn't have the sophisticated equipment of the original scientists, whom I will get to in a minute, but he could step down rates of vibration, like stepping down octaves on a piano. And they are called, in physics, it's called harmonics. And so they are harmonically related. They are the same basic frequency, but at lower and lower levels until you hit the auditory range. So that's what he gave my dad. My dad listened to that tape night and day and immediately started to feel better. So I think there's something about just harmonizing your body that's in this. But he went back to his MDs, as I had when I had the acupuncture, and they said, "Wow, damnedest case of spontaneous remission they'd ever seen." And
Wow.
my, I know it's just like a miracle story. And my dad died some years later of pneumonia. He did not die of leukemia. So that was the third slap from the universe. I decided I had to pay attention, and I started researching the two original scientists. One was an MD in Los Angeles, and one was I don't know, physicist. He knew everything about microscopy. He built microscopes. He was just a genius, and he was developing a microscope that enabled scientists and medicine to look without adding any chemical additives for any reason, to look at live disease specimen for the very first time. Now, this is about the time, the 20s, 30s, um, when the electron microscope was being developed. But it had the same problem that even today microscope studies have, in that the microscopes are so relatively weak to the one that this scientist was able to develop, that they add chemicals and baths and so on to make the specimen, the microbes they're trying to study, more visible. But the bad news is, just like with bombarding electrons, which changed the shape of the cells of the microbe and eventually broke down cell function, it the chemicals did the same thing. They changed the shape and cell function, and the microbes were killed. So science was looking for something that they had just eliminated. So it was the first time in the 1930s, I believe, at least in my research, that medicine and science had looked at living microbes from diseased samples, from basically terminally ill patients. So that might have added some aspect to it. Anyways, they then went on to discover, kind of, I don't know exactly how, I assume by accident, that if they could recreate that exact frequency that that microbe was vibrating at, it killed just the microbe and left the rest of your body untouched. So that's what was happening. My father's sound therapy, vibrational therapy, frequency therapy, it overwhelmed the microbes of his disease, and nothing else was touched. So he lived quite happily for another 4+ years.
Talk to us about how you developed the protagonists in the human trial.
Yeah, okay. So Dr. Randall Archer is my main character. And I felt like because of the time frame in the 20s, the 1920s and 30s, that it was not realistic to have, you know, I do have an important female character, but it was in the world of science, it was very unusual back then. So I had a young man, and he starts out on the wrong side of the tracks in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, steel country, and he comes from a very rough family and a very rough beginning. But he is absolutely brilliant, and his high school counselor knows of his brilliance and has a connection and gets him a full ride scholarship to Harvard, where he goes through undergrad, medical school, and he even goes on to a specialization in pathology, which was obviously related exactly to what this science is about. So that's so here is a guy from the wrong side of the track going to Harvard, and Harvard, as you know, has lots of people from the right side of the tracks. So especially back in the day, he never, I think the whole trajectory of his character arc is he always was searching for a place where he could fit in and feel comfortable. And I'm afraid that that was pretty impossible for him. And but meanwhile, he's meeting all of these really smart, really privileged people at Harvard, and he ends up working with another Harvard scientist. This one is a physicist, which also relates to the underlying science, which is really about quantum physics. So the two of them partner up, and the physicist is developing the microscope, as is true in true real life in my research. And they find out what the scientists found out, the real scientists. They found out that each disease had a unique frequency. The microbes had a unique frequency. And if they could recreate that frequency, they could kill the microbes and leave everything else untouched. Um, so, what happened to those scientists was not a very happy ending, but in my story, it's kind of mixed. But also, what happened to the real scientists is all of their work was confiscated. The microscopes were confiscated. No one has ever been able to duplicate those original Rife microscopes, and the world has suffered a big loss because of it. A lot of unnecessary suffering, uh, disease, death, and they were really onto something. They did. Their story pretty much ended with their human trial, so the name is even based on my original research. So they did a human trial, their scientific basis of frequency and or vibrational therapy was 100% effective. And you know, and then established medicine, especially in the time frame of the Great Depression, was not very welcoming. Let's just put it that way. And it all was pushed under the carpet. It has not been known until very recently.
Well, hey there. If you're enjoying our podcast, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep this show going. We love hearing from you, so any feedback is welcome. And thank you for being a part of our podcast family and for all your support. It truly means a lot to us. What part of it did you, because it's historical fiction, it's not a biography, so what parts in your story did you fictionalize to make it fit within the story you wanted to tell?
Okay, so what was important to me in writing this, after witnessing my father's recovery and my dog's recovery and my own recovery in a related sort of way, because acupuncture is based on the energetic flows in our body. And so this is all about energy.
Mm.
So, what was important to me when I took on writing this, which was very challenging for me, was to be true to the science, as absolutely as true to the science as I could be in plain English, which is also another challenge. I, I had an aside here. I had a wonderful physicist, and I had a wonderful pathologist advising me through the process of writing. And I would say to them quite honestly, nobody knows what you're talking about. I mean, you know, the people that you work with in, the physics department at UCLA or wherever, they know what you're talking about, but nobody else does. And this book is not intended for scientists only. It's intended for a broad spectrum of people who I hope can help bring about some necessary changes to our approach to medicine. So
Mm.
the science is really true, and as far as plain English would carry it, the fictionalized part are the characters who carry the story.
Mm-hmm.
Because, as I said at the beginning, what's important to me in a good story is characters I'm either fascinated with, love, hate, whatever, that grab me and won't let me go as the story builds suspensefully, and I have to know where it's going. So I have three main characters that do that.
I'm really curious because you combine a historical setting with scientific research. So how do you, as the author who is from the future based off of where you're taking it place, how do
Mhm.
you how do you prevent or how do you utilize your protagonist being a brilliant future minded mind to know things about what you already know, or do you struggle with that, or do you deliberately, like, make them to be such brilliant minds because you yourself as the author know what the future holds?
Well, they knew. I mean, the original scientists knew.
Mm,
They made these discoveries, and uh, their word. The word was spreading. You know, articles in the newspaper about them saying the end of cancer and all these kind of big, huge headlines grabbing the public. Um, so they knew. I didn't have to imagine it back into them. They knew, and I learned from them.
mm,
I learned what has been suppressed by, I would just call it the medical establishment, the highest level that controls how medical doctors are educated, what they can use in terms of treating illness, how they can approach what kind of tests they can use, and so on. So the highest level is really has a very strong control over medicine, much more so than in other countries, particularly in the United States.
Did the characters go in a direction that you weren't planning on as you were writing this?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's the fun of writing, isn't it? They surprise
Yeah.
you. Yes, so I have these two scientists. One's an MD, one's a brilliant physicist. Those two guys are in a plane by themselves. They're so smart and accomplished. But one is from a very privileged background and he kind of expects life to be good. He's optimistic. One is from the exact opposite, where life has been really rough and even violent. And he doesn't he's always afraid of what tomorrow might bring. And then we throw into the picture a friend of the physicist who grew up together in Boston, from a very privileged background. Yet she is a woman. I love her conflicts because she's from a very, very old family in Boston, a very privileged background, but she doesn't want to just be the quote unquote helpmate. She wants to find out
Mm.
who she is. She wants to go out into the world. She she wants to test herself against the world. So everybody has some good conflict, which makes them interesting, like the rest of us, right?
What message or mission do you hope readers take away from the human trial?
Well, it was just like my finally stopping and listening to what the universe was telling me that I needed to look into this. What had I just witnessed? What cured? And cure is a word you don't often hear in the medical realm. What cured my father? And and so it's funny because since I published this book, it has kind of set me onto a mission I wasn't fully anticipating. I was hoping it would catch that wave that seems to be building in the dissatisfaction with the way our medical system works as a whole. It's
Mm.
extremely expensive. It's very invasive. It tends to be drug oriented, and there's always not necessarily dire, but there's always side effects. And cure, again, cure is not a word you often hear. You might get rid of one set of symptoms, but then you might have a whole new set. I don't know. So I feel like there's a wave of dissatisfaction that's saying there must be a better way.
Mm.
Certainly there has to be a cheaper way. And you could leave the United States and go to any country and it would be cheaper to get exactly the same thing you're getting here. So there's a growing sense of dissatisfaction. I was hoping that I could pile onto that, and that I could add to that, and that people would start asking more questions. And but since the publication, I've started doing a series called my speaker series, where I've been bringing people from frequency healing, acupuncture, chiropractic, as functional medicine, all these experts, even a PhD in psychology from Columbia. I've had all these people on talking about how they approach health. I think the whole idea should be focused on health and longevity. And
Mm.
um, and so this mission has kind of taken off by itself, and I find myself really happily in the middle of it.
Mm. So, can you give us a glimpse into the next installment of the human trial trilogy then?
Yeah, it's really on my mind. I've been working, 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 and oh my gosh. Um, I thought it was going to be a little easier than it's been. So the second installment of my trilogy is set in the 70s. I do like these time frames where the world is kind of on edge. It was the end of the Vietnam War. It was Nixon leaving the White House. It was a whole bunch of radical ideas that was pitting us against our parents and so forth. So I'm moving into the 70s, and there are characters from the first book that make it into the second, but it is mostly a multi-generational family saga. So the story
Nice.
continues. The suppression of the science has continued, and so that's one of the points of it now being the 1970s, and still, where is this information about the vibratory rates of microbes and so on and so forth? And then, because we were all stuck in our homes for a few years during COVID, which is viral related, I thought, well, why don't I just bring it into modern times? So that
Mm.
would be the third. That would be the third of the trilogy, and it will take place during the COVID era.
So, Audrey, if people want to learn more about you and your work, where is the best place that they could go to?
Well, I think this thing you have up here, audreygaleauthor.com, would
There it
be
is.
it would have a whole bunch of information about not only my current book, but my previous book, which was not a medical thriller as this is, but a legal thriller. It's so funny. I never think of myself as reading thrillers, but I guess I just write them. and and there's lots of information on there about the book and about the science and about me and where we're going.
Perfect. Well,
Yeah.
Audrey, so you're going to have to come on when you have your second book out. Then
Oh,
the
okay.
second book to the
I
trilogy.
will not
Yeah.
forget you said that, Barney. I
Perfect.
hope it's, early in the next year.
Right. Okay. Excellent.
I
Perfect.
hope.
Yeah, because this book came out in 2023, right?
It came out at the end of 2023, like
Right.
the very end of September of 2023.
Cool. So basically, every couple of years or so, you put out a new book. Then.
Well, that would be. I'm kind of slow. I'm kind of slow. I have to admit, I'm kind of slow. Um, but that would be a wonderful thing to say about me. So I'm going to say yes, of course.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming in, Audrey. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Barney. I enjoyed it.
Uh, and so, where do you could? It, oh, this is the reason why, Audrey, I like to pre-record these instead of like doing it live, because then I can edit it afterwards, and then I can make myself sound so much more smarter after the fact, after I edit out all
Well, she
my
does
ums.
both sound smart.
So